Welcome to another discussion on COVID-19 and PI. This is brought to you by Techvity Investing. PI stands for Politics, Industry and Economy. Today we have an esteemed guest with us, Mr. Shreyash Patankar. Shreyash works in the capital goods sector, has over a decade plus experience working with one of India's largest infrastructure companies. But he works with a subsidiary of this company, which is involved in manufacturing and design of electrical equipment, which majorly fits into the capital goods sector. A little bit more about Shreyash. Shreyash is a mechanical engineer by profession with over 10 years experience working in this field, and he is based out of Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur. At his organization, Shreyash is at a senior level, and he works as an R&D manager with expertise in manufacturing and new product development. Hi Shreyash, thank you so much for joining us and taking the time for this discussion.
Thanks for having me over, Kalpak.
All right, so Shreyash, getting on with it, I would like to first start with you're the first guest we've had who's not based in India at the moment. So how is it? How has Malaysia dealt with this crisis? And as an Indian staying outside, if I can call you an NRI, what is your perspective of how the Indian government has acted on this pandemic in the last 2 months?
Well, to answer the first part of your question, Kalpak, the Malaysian government and specifically the Ministry of Health of Malaysia has done a great job, a very commendable job in bringing this COVID situation under control. So Malaysia happened to be one of the very first countries in Southeast Asia to declare a lockdown, and soon enough the situation came under control. It took
Right.
around 8 weeks or so to bring the case count to near minimal. So recently they have announced that they are facing not more than a few dozens of cases every day.
Right.
And they have relaxed the lockdown a lot. They call it the movement control order over here. It's called the MCO in short.
Okay.
And for the past few weeks, they have relaxed it, and now they are calling it a conditional movement control order, or the CMCO. So under the CMCO, you would see that relaxations include malls opening up, offices. Some of the offices have been allowed to open up. Of course, the essential services had always been working ever since the lockdown was announced. And now, apart from schools and nurseries, bars and pubs, you would see most other parts of the economy which have already opened up. Talking about how we perceive how India has dealt with the situation, again, I would like to say that India too has done a commendable job, and our Prime Minister has taken stern action to fight this disease. And of course, going into lockdown, although a lot of our folks in India had to suffer a lot of restrictions, I think it is a necessary evil which all of us have to deal with. And I hope the situation gets better very soon and we can go back to our normal lives, or whatever we call is a new normal now.
Oh, thank you, Shreyash, for that insightful answer. We have got a long discussion ahead of us. You're from one of the very exciting sectors to be talking about right now. I can call it the capital goods sector or the manufacturing sector. And correct me if I go wrong anywhere. Okay. So I would like to firstly start by asking. My understanding of the capital goods sector is it is probably one of the most global sectors. So it is not easy to manufacture a capital good. In your case, I think it's electrical equipment, which then later on fits into, say, a capex budget of a company that you sell to. Okay, so you're a seller of capital goods. So as a manufacturer of capital goods, you also have a lot of things that you manufacture in-house and also buy from vendors, which are also capital good manufacturers in turn, right? So typically these supply chains are very global. Okay, and it is very rare to see that everything is manufactured at just one place and the end product is then shipped out. It is very rare to see such kind of an ecosystem. Firstly, I would like to understand, is that the kind of industry you operate in? Can you give us an idea of how, just like to set a discussion field, how does it typically work? Yeah.
Certainly, Kalpak. So, to answer your question, definitely electrical equipment and most other capital goods which you see in
Yeah.
today's market are highly globalized, uh, in the sense that the supply chains are very global. So, to talk about some of the products that we manufacture, you would see components coming from as far away as Korea, Japan, some from the United States, Europe, all over.
Right.
And then they land here in Malaysia. Then they go through multiple levels of processing. Some processing which we do in house,
Right.
and of course we have our subcontractors and vendors who do some of the sub processing for us.
Right.
So there is one set of components or materials which we buy from abroad, and then there is another set which we buy locally, and once we process these goods, the finished goods are then again shipped away to more than 30 countries. We deal with customers from over 2 dozen countries currently. So the total lead time of manufacturing, if you look at from the point of creation of the first of the simplest components to the delivery of finished goods to our customers, it could stretch to as long as a few months.
Right.
Now, talking about the money involved, you would know that we work on credit terms which could be stretched to as long as even 90 days of payment, and
Right.
the shortest I've seen is even 30 days.
Right.
And the same applies to even our customers. So when we sell goods to them, it's not that we get all the money immediately.
Correct.
You typically get some amount in advance, and latter part is delivered upon delivery.
As you were talking about, how these projects are, how the working capital works with these projects. Can you give us an idea about how this has there been a change in the last 2-3 months? So there will be definitely projects that are work in progress, projects that have been awarded and haven't started work on, and projects that are in your sales pipeline. Okay, these are the three projects that you kind of have. Can you tell me how? Uh, Firstly, can you tell us which sectors you cater to? Where do your products typically fit in? So that will give us an idea of your further answer.
So, to give you an idea of where our products go, well, they go everywhere, wherever you see infrastructure,
Yeah.
be it an office building, be it a residential complex, be it a power plant, be it an oil refinery.
Right.
You would see our electrical equipment, because we make electrical equipment catering to both low voltage and medium voltage supplies. So you
Right.
would see them going everywhere.
Okay.
Now, talking about the different segments, different customer segments the different segments of projects that we have right now. So we have a lot of WIP projects. Now, the current focus on these projects is to generate the most amount of value without deviating from the specifications required by the customers. Then we have another set of projects which you defined as projects in pipeline.
Yeah.
So these projects, typically the way they work is the purchase order as such does not guarantee that you can start manufacturing. You typically get a separate manufacturing clearance based on the site conditions and the allied equipment and so forth. So although you have an order in hand, it does not mean that you will be able to convert that order into an invoice soon,
Right. So
unless
is
and
that
until you get a manufacturing clearance.
is a
So we are
manufacturing
seeing a
clearance?
lot of,
Uh,
yeah.
is a sorry, just a sub question. Is a manufacturing clearance typical in this business, or is it only pertaining to Malaysia or your kind of vertical?
No, not really. So the way electrical equipments work are, there are typically two types. One are electrical standard products, which you can buy off the shelf or you would find in the warehouse of a dealer or a manufacturer. And second are the customized goods, which are
Right.
typically in the projects industries.
Right. Right.
So your high-end equipments, the large bulky equipments like transformers, switchboards, bus ducts, generators, these kind of equipments could fall in this latter category. Of course, there would be some amount which do fall in the standard product space, but you cannot, since the type of customers and the type of sites vary so much. As I explained earlier, you need to customize them a great deal. The work in progress kind of orders that we have, our focus now is to try to squeeze out the value from this. So we are taking up a lot of lean initiatives and value engineering projects to make the same product with lesser cost, or orders which have been placed, whether
Yeah.
they are getting converted or not. So we are seeing some level of disruption in some specific segments. If I were to say, talking about the construction sector in particular, we are
Okay.
seeing that all the orders are placed to us. These orders are not moving into manufacturing clearance, because most of the builders or construction companies who are the end users and the buyers for this are facing liquidity problems.
Yeah.
Power and oil and gas and the other sectors wherein we have received orders, we do see movement over there.
Okay.
So specifically, we are seeing movement in projects related to uh, government infrastructure or government investments. I
Right.
believe most of the governments world across want to pump in money through infrastructure so that the vendors, local supply chains get benefited and the economy starts moving again. And finally, talking about new projects which we are trying to bag, definitely there is a great slowdown over there in terms of number of tenders being floated by governments. So as I mentioned earlier, capital expenditure has been routed. The money for capital expenditure has been routed to a lot of other places like healthcare and development of healthcare and giving benefits to the local population. So
Right.
the state governments and even federal governments are finding it difficult to find money to invest in newer projects. So of course, the projects which are already in pipeline have some capex allocated to them, so they are not facing the trouble. And the same story we are also seeing through large companies who are now seeing problems with their cash flows. Some of the cash rich companies too are refraining from expanding their facilities or thinking about greenfield projects as of now. So
Wow.
we do see a great shrinkage in the outlay of upcoming projects. So it's going to be a difficult few quarters ahead, if not a year.
So Shreyas, if I can try and summarize, you said some very, very important points. I think viewers and listeners must take note. Is that a lot of the projects that are going through where capital goods are required are typically government-backed projects, and governments are trying to front-end infrastructure spending. That is a pattern that you're seeing, and probably private projects are kind of taking a back seat. There is uncertainty there. In some cases you probably don't have manufacturing clearances, and in some cases even probably production is halted. As for new projects, you mentioned that there is not a lot of tendering activity at the moment, but new activity you guys expect is majorly going to be government related activity. So there's going to be a lot of action in the government space. So companies that are already positively predisposed to cater to governments, having prior experience in catering to governments, would definitely be at least some competitive advantage in this kind of a market. Am I right in inferring that summary, Shreyash?
You summarized it well. I would just like to correct the last point that you made
Okay.
about companies which have had experiences in supplying to government-backed projects. So now
Okay.
the situation has changed from a specification-driven market to largely a cost-driven market in all sectors, everywhere. So earlier we would see that in high-end projects specifically, you would be shortlisted based on your reference list and largely your reference list and the kind of technology and product that you deliver to the market.
Yeah.
Now that also includes the cost at which you're delivering,
Right.
and of course the place of manufacturing too, because we can see that many countries including India have chosen to be more protectionist. You are seeing that there is a spate going on between China and Australia now, and China has for example banned the beef supplies from Australia.
Right.
So the local manufacturers in China are the local tanneries or the local slaughterhouses in China are trying to take maximum advantage of this situation, and we would also see this happening in several other sectors, including our sector, which I'm talking about. So local manufacturers will definitely have an opportunity to 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 cater to government requirements. So the
I
the
have
hegemony of Western manufacturers or high-end manufacturers could see some dilution, at least in
great.
these times.
Shreyas, actually, I have a question, follow-up question to you about that. But I'll ask it slightly later on. I would like to first complete this interesting discussion that we are at. I found one very interesting term that you used, value engineering. Okay. Uh, Firstly, is value engineering jugaad or is it a science? Okay, please tell our viewers that. Secondly, if value engineering is possible, why aren't companies always doing it? So, uh, I would like to get a perspective on that. Why
Right,
start now?
Kalpam.
Yeah.
So to answer your second question first about why start now, well, value engineering is a continuously happening activity in most of the good companies in the world. What value engineering means is is not jugaad. It's not that you are trying to do some thupatti and trying to sell a subgrade equipment to trying to develop a subgrade equipment to sell to the customer. No, what value engineering means is you try to meet the same specifications, the same functions, the same qualities what are required in the product or the project or the service. It could be applied everywhere by using the least amount of material or people or processing or whatever is required, whatever cost money for you to
Even working capital,
deliver that.
even working capital. So you
Even
can squeeze your,
working capital, definitely,
yeah.
definitely, definitely.
So you can
So,
improve your
so
credit term.
value engineering,
Yeah.
yeah, correct. So value engineering largely speaks about this ratio of what is the function that the cost that you are going to spend to develop this so-called product, process, or service. What is that ratio?
Right.
Leaner the ratio, better are your systems disposed to process, to create value at the least amount of cost. For example, we are having this interaction over a Zoom call right now.
Right.
Neither of us are paying money for
Correct.
this. We could have
Yeah.
had the same interaction probably at a nice cafe in Bombay, for which I would have had to fly over there, or you would choose to come over here and we would do that. So this is a great example of value engineering, what we are doing right now. We are to the effect of delivering the service, you are going to make the same video. We are going to cover the same content that you are covering now. But
Great
at the
point.
same time, we are not going to spend anything.
Very nice
So
example.
this is
Yeah.
an example of value engineering for you. So
But
value
that
engineering
being
is a
said,
continuously, yeah. So now talking about the first part of your question,
yeah.
uh, companies are trying to uh, do value engineering on a broader scale now. They want everybody to look at it more seriously. And in fact, now value engineering is one of the strategic drives going on in most of the manufacturing companies out there. So you would these manufacturing companies earlier, I would say, would involve only the engineers in this value engineering exercise. Now you would see the whole company from top to bottom. I'm talking about the CEO all the way down to the lowest rung of workmen or whoever works in the company being involved in this value engineering exercise. And now it's being deployed everywhere.
Right.
People are talking about how well can we uh, how well can we utilize our electricity, for example. uh, People are talking about why don't we set our air conditioning temperature to 27 degrees instead of 25. It's
Right.
saving finally, right?
Right.
So this is the seriousness and depth of value analysis and value engineering being
Yeah, actually, it does
used
make sense
in
there
companies.
because
And it's a good thing. It's a good thing.
absolutely.
It's actually going to help the economy everywhere. I think all of us should do this even at a personal level, and I believe it can create a great unlock a great amount of value from our method of working.
I think it also has a positive impact on the resources that you consume, right? For the same product, you're consuming in a way lesser resource. That's what the value engineering I would sum it up as. Environmentally it is a better thing for sure, indirectly or directly. That's what it will translate to, right?
Definitely, Kalpak. Definitely.
I want to talk to you about now. Something that you guys do. You're an innovator. You're an R&D manager. So you guys make new products, right? And uh, so you are also involved at the purchase side of things, right? You're sourcing material. You're sourcing. You're constantly looking out for new things in the industry, I'm sure. So how has that changed in the last 2-3 months? Have you been has innovation stopped? Has it accelerated? And also, what is the supply like? Are you getting stuff you require, or is it like really delayed, or what's your sense in this regard?
All right. So I'll try to answer the second part of your question first again. So when this coronavirus and the subsequent lockdowns started in late January in China, and then soon enough Korea too went under some level of lockdown. I believe that was sometime in February. So uh, it had not become a global event until then.
Right.
So when China was impacted, in fact, it sent a lot of shockwaves in the supply chains all over, because China, as you know, manufactures a lot of goods
Yeah.
although we are not directly buying goods from China, a lot of our suppliers are buying raw material and components from China. So we did see the effects in some form or other. But I would say up until March, we were not largely affected, because the transport sector was still working, and it takes a good amount of time. It takes some time for inventories to really deplete, and for supply chains to be hit adversely. But looking at what could have happened, we of course started to look for alternate supplies, and there is a great drive going on about indigenization of components
Yeah.
to lessen our reliance on imported goods for
Right.
two reasons. Primarily the cost part, which is linked to the value engineering, which I was talking about in the earlier part of our discussion. And second is about uh, reducing your reliance to unnecessary risks, such as what has happened recently.
Right.
So these are two parts which companies are actively performing, and I believe most good companies actively perform this throughout, regardless of the effect of coronavirus. Now, talking about the first part, I believe you asked about whether we are innovating or not. In
Yeah.
fact, what I have experienced is that uh, departments like the one which I work in are working in overdrive now. In fact, so we have to think about finding innovative ways to produce the product by reducing the amount of processing, as I said, or can we use alternate materials which are cheaper? Can we use simpler processes? Can we reduce the time somewhere? Can we reduce the amount of fuel required somewhere? These are the things that we are actively looking at, and designers like myself uh, have a great role to play over here, because we look at uh, the cost part of it very closely,
Correct.
and every cent counts as of now. So we are looking at not only the product, but we also look at how it is packaged. Can we do something about the packaging? Can we use a better material, a better foam for packing it? You know, a lot of things. Can we
Got
look at suppliers who have better processes, which then we can emulate? So this also requires some amount of expenditure to do these kind of process changes or indigenize components or to develop new processes which are going to be more efficient. So most of the good manufacturing companies would be looking at a big roster of value engineering projects and innovative ideas, which uh, and then they would look at the cost associated to each one of these projects,
Yeah.
and then they would multiply it by the ease of doing this project or the time it would take to get this project on board, and finally they would look at the risk part of it. What would be the effect on the quality of the product or the reliability of the product, or anything for that
Got it.
matter, and they will finally multiply these three things and come up with a priority number. And you would typically uh, you'd make a list of these projects and give maximum of your time to the top few projects.
Got it.
That's the typical way of working this out. And of course you would also look at uh, the internal rate of return, the ROI, the NPVs of each of these projects based on the amount of money required and the time required, because as you are aware, cash is short. In fact, companies are scrambling to raise capital now, and this capital is going to be very precious for the next few quarters, if not a year, as I said earlier. So we have to be very judicious about the time we spend and the money we spend on projects. So we have
Wow.
to choose it wisely.
Shreyas, that was that was a very strong point you made about new money being extremely precious. I agree with you. Uh, Regarding coming back to your vendors, like you said, you've got vendors all across the group. So you're in a very interesting position because you can comment on the the sales side of your product as well as the manufacturing side of your product. You've got vendors all across, and I'm sure some of them are probably even bigger organizations than you are, and some of them are 5 people companies, right? Is there a different impact you're seeing in professionally run big companies versus say a MSME or a smaller company? Is there, because you're working with them, you're interacting with them, is there something different? And how would you gauge and say rate the future of these two entities?
The effect of this global depression on these two sets of companies, I can see has been very different and varied across geographies. So what I'm seeing now is a lot of consolidation of demand.
Mhm.
What I'm seeing is that smaller companies which were not cash rich, which were having cash flow issues, have found it very difficult to sustain operations during the lockdown.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of layoffs happening in these smaller companies, smaller and bigger companies with cash flow problems. However, cash-rich companies have been successful in retaining all of their workforce and their commitments. And so the effect of this has been that a lot of small companies typically do not have so much cash uh, to sustain themselves. Some of them, unfortunately, have shut down and they are unable to raise the capital.
Yeah.
So I can see some level of consolidation of demand there, wherein the smaller, wherein the orders which were going to the smaller companies have now been placed on to bigger companies because they can deliver in the required time and with the same credit terms that you would look for. So smaller companies, of course, are now demanding cash on delivery terms, which is they give you the goods and you pay them right there and then. So there is very little tolerance for credit terms. So typical credit terms can span from as short as 2 weeks to as long as even 3 months.
Yeah.
And now that all companies are facing liquidity crisis, companies are squeezing their suppliers. They of course get squeezed in turn from their customers and are demanding longer credit terms. So these smaller companies are facing trouble over there because you won't get the cash flow with a longer credit term if you offer that to your customer, and then you would face trouble in sustaining your operations. So what is happening is that a lot of these orders which were earlier going to smaller companies are now being taken over by bigger companies.
Got it. So,
So
Suresh, if
although
I
the
can,
demand has reduced, what I foresee is that even after the coronavirus situation is stabilized and the economy kickstarts again, and we go back to, if not pre-coronavirus, then at least some reasonable level of economic activity, you would see that bigger corporations who have sustained operations would get a larger market share, and you would
wow,
see this happening in several other sectors of the economy as well.
which a lot of listeners will be very interested in, primarily because despite all this doom and gloom, two things, if I can infer from what you said, is firstly, companies that are not well managed, don't have a good cash position, have lost all their demanding power, and they might lose business to larger well managed companies. Secondly, unorganized businesses, or the unorganized sector, again faces a similar kind of fate, and that business also might go on to well managed larger companies. So once this is over, firstly there will be a larger chunk of organized businesses, because big companies still have a decent cash position, and the big companies will actually have better market shares. So it is a good time to look for well managed, well run companies who can deliver in such times, is it not, as an investor?
That's right, and in fact, some of the bigger companies are also out on the hunt for smaller companies which are going to shutter down as part of their acquisition plan. Because come to think of it, this can't be a better time. I mean, some of your smaller competitors which were emerging, which had some specific technology which you are looking for, now you can get the same acquisition done for a much lower cost.
Wow.
So I think these two is going to happen soon enough.
Yes, you laid some very strong points on the table, and thank you very much for that. I would like I would like to ask you one last question. If you can just briefly give me an idea, we're running short of time. Uh, you must have followed the media recently. The government of India has released a stimulus 2.0. They call the campaign to become self-reliant or Atmanirbhar, and there is a lot of fillip given to the MSME sector, and we the politics, the policy of the nation is to become as self-reliant as possible, get MSMEs to manufacture quality products. uh, we have not really done that, barring a few sectors. I'll come to that. uh, China has been able to be part of the electronics revolution. We have not, we've missed the bus, and so on and so forth. With many other tech, we've missed it. Luckily we had a few good enterprising IT companies, and that really was the last 2 decades of real boom in India. Had that not been there, maybe something else would have. But really we don't see, besides say the auto sector and the IT services sector, you know India has the talent and the capability, okay, but clearly something is lacking, that is not able to make India a superpower or self-reliant, or a global export hub or a manufacturer of goods. Now the government has made ambitious plans, as you already know, and they're putting the weight of their expectations on shoulders of MSMEs, and saying, you take loans, you do what you want to do, become big, become self-reliant, export goods. As an expert in this field, especially, say, let's talk specifically about capital goods, what kind of an ecosystem should be provided to make this possible? Is just making loans more available uh, good enough incentive, or a strong driver to innovation and creating world class products, or at least products that can make you self reliant? Sorry, that was a loaded question, but yeah, looking forward to your answer.
Yeah, Kalpak, I think that's a very relevant question pertaining to our current situation now. So you mentioned about how China has been successful in being a global powerhouse when it comes to manufacturing. So
Yeah.
let's delve a little bit into China's story. So how China really evolved to where it is today is they started off at as an ancillary components manufacturer for most of the goods back in the late 70s and 80s. So they were never into high-end manufacturing or even making finished full-fledged equipments which would be exported all over the world. So they started off making smaller components, and then they went on to vertically integrate
Yeah.
into the value chain. So what they did was they moved up the ladder. First, they would make these smaller components and then ship them off abroad. Then soon enough, bigger companies realized that, oh, these guys can manufacture goods, so why don't we set up our shop over there? Then they set up their own shops in China, and that's how technology flew into China. That's
Yeah.
how the ecosystem was really created. They're already manufacturing basic components. Then the technology flew in once foreign companies made investments in China. The Chinese government had made a lot of provisions to attract FDI at that time. The labor rates were low, the land rates were at uh, very low prices, and so on. And that's how technology came in. And once these technologies come in, I mean, talking about it at a very personal level, what we see is once uh, engineers or workers learn about these technologies, it's very easy for them to shift to other companies making similar goods, or go out and start their own companies making similar goods. Then again, we know about how China honors intellectual property rights, and how easy or difficult it is to use technology and horizontally deploy it to other companies.
Yeah.
So I believe that may not happen in India. You cannot do that easily. But talking about the ecosystem required to become a manufacturing powerhouse, well, number one, you need to have have the right set of skills. So you need the right talent with expertise who know about the industry in specific. So you can't do this overnight.
Yeah.
Projects like this would take several decades. So there are, of course, several successful examples in India. You mentioned about the automotive sector. Well, if you talk about some of the reputed companies like Tata Motors or Bajaj Auto, if you look at how many years it took them to develop their own R&D capabilities and come up with uh, cutting edge products which could then be exported all over the world. Pulsar, for example, is sold even in Malaysia. It's a
Right.
known sport in Malaysia, which is made by Bajaj. One can see that it took them several decades to reach that level, from being a basic manufacturer of two-wheelers to reaching export quality goods and then penetrating and dominating markets.
Right.
So I believe throwing money at it is not going to solve the problem. We need to the government. I would plead to the government to find methods to create the whole ecosystem. So you start with institutes which train the youth to make them employable. Again, the quality of education is something which we really need to improve upon. Uh, so uh, that is where it starts. Second is giving a level playing field to the manufacturers of India. So since we are set up, if the expectations are that Indian manufacturers should sell on a global stage, you need to make a level playing field. That means the tariff rates that Indian manufacturers face when they're exporting to other companies, other countries, need to be leveled off. So you can't have manufacturers from, let's say, Vietnam or Thailand or China being able to sell to the United States at, let's say, 5%, and when it comes to an Indian manufacturer, he has to deal with 15%. He won't be competitive. There's no way you can deal with
Great
that.
point. Yeah.
So we need to create a level playing field, and finally we need to build the right infrastructure to not only produce but to ship the goods abroad. So I was talking about the Chinese story. How they evolved was that the best companies of the world went to China and started producing their goods in China. So for India to do that, we need to provide the right infrastructure to attract all of these global engineering powerhouses and set up their shops in India. Uh, that's how technology will get embedded into India. And once technology is embedded, I think that's the complete ecosystem. Then you can horizontally deploy it to other companies, as I was mentioning earlier. You could have these big companies go and start their own smaller companies, they become suppliers, they have their own suppliers, or they become competitors, and so on. So I think that's where we need to head if we
So
want to
Shreyas,
compete with the likes of China, even emulate what China has done for that matter.
in a way, to become Atmanirbhar, for some time we have to become, globe nirbhar. We have to depend on the best technology teaching us how it's done, in a way, right? All right.
I'm sorry, I would need to interrupt you over here. So I would say that Indian manufacturers have already been Atmanirbhar all this while. Now, what they need is Nirbharta on the government. That's what the requirement is today. And
Wow.
the Nirbharta is not only through cash incentives, it's through creating the whole ecosystem for these manufacturers to compete with every other manufacturer out there and show the world that India is no less than any other country out there. Indian engineers are in fact known for their talent world across.
Great. Wow. Thank you, Shreyas. That is some strong advice. I will tend to agree with most things that you said. Shreyas, we'll finish it off, and as we do in this segment, I would like to ask you, uh, about the positives of all of this time on a personal level. How did you utilize this, the lockdown and the time, and what are the positives you've taken from this experience? If you can just quickly tell us.
Okay, surely, Kalpak. So, frankly, I haven't had so much of free time in the past few months. In fact, we have been working on overdrive, sometimes even burning midnight oil weekends. The wife and children, of course, complain about this. But of course, the positive note is that for an industry like mine, where work from home was something like a distant dream or something that you could see the people from IT or the banking and services industry do from their ivory towers. We would typically do shifts and go to work. So we had a chance to taste that life. So that was a great positive. What we have learned is that there were a lot of mind blocks about working from home, or a lot of fallacies which were corrected, that working from home means people just chill out and watch movies. It's not like that. Sincere people, in fact, I've seen a lot of my colleagues working just as rigorously or even more so during this lockdown, and still they are able to deliver whatever they could do. So the key takeaway here was that one great epiphany for the manufacturing industry, or our company at least, was that you can do a large amount of your work which earlier we thought could not be done. Of course, being made possible by technology like VPN and sharing licenses and all of these things. So that has been a great positive experience. Of course, having a chance to spend a lot of time with the family. Uh, of course, this has been a great experience for us.
Wow. Thank you so much, Triyesh. With this, we conclude the discussion. I really would like to call you for our next discussion, because we had a very invigorating talk. I think a lot of important insights were drawn from your expert views, and once again I'm very thankful to you for your time. Take care, buddy. Hope to see you soon.
Thanks for having me, Kalpak.